Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So for those who are watching this morning, what we're seized with in Parliament is recommendations in a report around that could relate to building housing. My colleague from Parry Sound Muskoka just outlined some of the how we could potentially build more housing in Canada. What I would like to do this morning is hopefully, for everybody who's here, outline the why. Both with stories from my community, but also a personal story. So if you look on CBC News this week, there's a story, it was posted on June the 8th, and it says, kind of dehumanizing what it's like trying to find a decent place to rent in Calgary these days. In January of this year, Calgary saw rents increase by 22%. That was the largest increase in the country. And now if you look in my riding, there's virtually nothing to rent that's under $2,000 unless you're looking to rent a room. So if you think about somebody who is trying, even just a single person, to find a room and you can't find it, and then your rent has increased by 22%, it's pretty crazy. It is dehumanizing. And when people talk about crime, oh, we need to address crime, or we need to address addiction, if we are not affording people the dignity of a safe place to live that they can afford, we are never going to address those problems. So I want to speak today both to my colleagues in the government and implore them that they have to use their jurisdictional power to lean on municipalities to make right decisions and just decisions for building housing. But I also want to implore to my colleagues in my own city that they also have a responsibility to look beyond pandering for NIMBY votes and do the right thing to change policies in order so we can actually build housing. And I'll start with a personal story. When I went through divorce about a decade ago, and this is a decade ago, so when rent was still reasonable in Canada, I had a hard time finding a place to live. And I was going through an extremely emotional time. It was really hard. And I had to figure out how I was going to pay the bills, right? I want to tell you that right now, in every part of our country, there are women like me who are making choices on whether or not to stay in relationships based on whether or not they can find a place to live. That's the reality of this situation. There are people with families who are trying to figure out how they can come together in a very small living space because they can't afford to live separately. And then in those situations, nobody wants to rent to them. When we're talking about homelessness today, I think all of us have this sort of Hollywood notion of what homelessness means, but we are now living in a country where homelessness is pervasive and it's across every demographic, every gender, and it's in every one of our backyards. So when I hear from colleagues or supporters things like, well, we just need to look at brownfield development. Are you kidding me? These are our neighbors. These are our fellow humans. Or I don't know, I think those townhomes would change the character of my community. You know what? I live in a multi-family unit in Calgary. I rent. I live surrounded with people from new Canadian communities, families from all different types of walks of life, and I live safely and happily. You know why? Because we've all got a place to live and a roof over our homes. So will housing change the character of a neighborhood? You bet it will. It'll make it more just, more equitable, and give people a sustainable future. So when I hear municipalities, as my colleague from Parry Sound Muskoka, talk about, well, we need to consult for another 3 years on whether or not we could have an extra parking space here and there. That is the fundamentally wrong approach. It is an inhumane approach that does not recognize the national crisis that we are in, the hopelessness that our shared constituents feel. And again, it is reaching out to people, it is pandering to votes to people who only have the privilege of getting into the housing market at a time when housing was affordable. And guess what? That is rapidly changing. In Alberta, we don't have rent control. So what that means is people who are renting from people who maybe bought like an investment property on spec, on a variable rate mortgage, they can't afford to pay that mortgage on the rent that they were charging people. And that's why we're seeing 23, 24, 30% increases. Do you know what it means to have a 30% increase in your rent in a year? It means you're homeless. That's what it means. So I'm sorry. Like at this point, an esoteric debate about parking when we can't house our families is ridiculous. I'm saying this is a conservative. Everybody needs to wake up. And the federal government has an onus of responsibility to ensure that they are not funding the bad behavior of municipalities that can't figure this out. Because when the federal government does that, they're actually incenting and empowering NIMBYs. I know that people in communities who have lived there for a long time, change is something that we have to bring people along with. I get that. But that's what we should be doing. We should be making this case of, hey, you guys are concerned about that stabbing that happened on the LRT yesterday or an increase in addiction. We have to find people places to live. And how we change the character of our communities for the better, and stop them from descending into crime, poverty, and hopelessness is by building more houses, period. And I know and I believe firmly in my heart the compassion and caring of the people in my community, that even though they may have concerns about building townhomes, that when leaders stand up and ask them, hey, please come along with us because there's so much at stake for us not to do that, that they will come along. But leaders have to stand up and do that first. And I am standing up here and I am proudly saying we need to build more houses. We need to look at every idea, but it's got to start, we have to work across different levels of government, but it's got to start with the federal government acknowledging that what they're doing is not good enough. When I hear the Minister of Housing stand up in the House of Commons and use rote talking points, and I see his colleagues cringe behind him, they do this, ooh. It's an acknowledgement that the course the government is on, it's not fast enough, it's not good enough, and it's not leveraging that pressure, that incentive on municipalities, that NIMBY cannot be how we build houses. NIMBY can't be our housing policy anymore. And that's what our party has been saying. Like, this is crisis level proportions. I mean, like, everybody in every place in this house has a story like the one that I just read. This isn't just one part of our country, it is every part of our country. And just to emphasize, like, that the anxiety that people are feeling right now because they don't know if their landlord is going to sell their townhome. That's the other thing. In a rent control situation where mortgage rates are super high, but the housing prices are staying high and there's no more stock coming in, people are going to sell. The level of affordable housing stock is going to continue to decrease. Like, come on, guys, we got to get our act together. This report here, it has some recommendations, but it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, which is, as leaders, we all need to wake up to the anxiety, the panic that people are feeling about where they're going to put their families. How can somebody go to work, go to school, do anything productive without a place to live? That's what we're dealing with here. So from the bottom of my heart, I implore my colleagues in the federal government, talk to the Minister of Housing and say, hey, bud, the talking point binder, scrap it. My community, we got to do better. When we stand up in the House of Commons and say, oh, we're investing, well, if investing means that the housing stock isn't getting to where it needs to be, then things have got to change. And that's what we're arguing for here this morning. This is too important for us to screw up. And we have to understand and be compassionate towards people who are making life decisions not out of want or desire, but because they have to, because they don't have a place to live. And that's got to change. So guys, I hope we can all work together in this place, Speaker, and do something that actually reduces this anxiety because the rent is too high.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The element for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for her very personal and compelling speech. And I want to say I can't imagine that there's a member in the House who doesn't feel the same way, that this is a crisis and that we have to work on this. You know, member constituents in my area as well. But I would say attacking municipalities and saying that it is all their fault is not the correct way to go either, in my opinion. We do, for the first time, have a national housing strategy. Part of that is a housing accelerator fund and a rapid housing initiative, which is working in concert with the municipalities. But often I hear across the way and from many people that, you know, this is about jurisdiction, and certainly in Alberta and in Quebec, we're not to interfere with anything that the provinces have jurisdiction on. And I noted in your speech you talked about Alberta not having rent control. So I'm wondering, are you advocating for the federal government to get involved in provincial jurisdiction, for example, in Alberta, to ensure that there is rent control for people like yourself and others who are looking at rental property, rental increases? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I need to remind members to run it through the chair, so even though I'd love to answer some of those questions, I can't, so I'll let the honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill answer it.
Well, my colleague's right. It's not all the municipality's fault. It's her government's fault. They've had 8 years, they've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, and all they have to show for it is anxiety and panic among people who can't afford rent. Not just because of the lack of affordable housing, and that's a big part of it, but because deficit inflationary spending has increased interest rates so high that people are selling off affordable housing stock that never used to be a problem under a lack of rent control because they can't afford to pay the interest rates on their mortgages, right? So for my colleague opposite to stand there and not be introspective, yeah, there is a fault of municipalities. I'm going to be the first one to say it. I dare her to have the courage to say the same thing. There are people on my city council that share my political persuasion who need to hear this message, and I'm going to stand up and say it. I haven't heard a single Liberal do the same thing, and that's the problem here, right? The federal government is rewarding municipalities that are not building houses fast enough, that they're not changing regulations fast enough. Problem one, and problem two, they've created this economic condition by spending out of control. Yep. People's lives are worse, and interest rates have gone through the roof. So to any backbencher in the Liberal Party who doesn't look at themselves and look at their cabinet, they got a big problem, and they're part of the problem too.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This debate is very timely because, in fact, at 9:45, I received an email from the CEGEP of Témiscamingue. It said, in the context of a housing crisis, residence costs at CEGEP have never been so high. So the college has sent out a call to all to find housing for the future workforce of Témiscamingue, that is, our students. Our organization has also launched a call for help to members, internally, externally. So that's where we're at now, Mr. Speaker. This has a huge impact on the development of our communities and also, especially in the context of young people who are unable to find housing. So what are the recommendations that my colleague from Calgary-Nose Hill has personally so that we can finally stop burying our heads under the sand and help people?
My colleague just described a situation that's endemic across the country. The housing crisis is affecting everyone. There have been many stories in the news of universities and colleges across the country as well who students can't go there anymore because they can't find a place to rent. There were stories in the news about the deplorable living conditions students were facing. This week as well, there were stories about how new Canadians, people who have moved to Canada from other jurisdictions around the world, have said, I can't stay here because it costs too much to live. We're literally turning people away that should be part of our workforce and they're suffering indignities on where people can't afford to live. Recommendations, my colleague from Parry Sound Muskoka outlined them. This is a systemic problem. It comes from the fact, I think, within our scope here in the House of Commons, of a housing strategy led by a federal government that is not delivering. It's not delivering. If it was delivering, we wouldn't be having this debate. I mean, the proof's in the pudding here. So they have to, first of all, solution one, acknowledge that there's a problem and that what they're doing is not working. Number two, we have to make sure that government programs aren't rewarding municipalities that are putting in place regulatory processes that preclude housing from being built at the rate that it needs to be built. And number three, like, we need to have compassion in this place and understand that we all do have a responsibility to push the federal government, hold the federal government to account on its lack of success and ask them to do better. And that includes the backbench and the Liberal Party.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate.